joking. I travel all over the country and I talk to teachers everywhere. And I think this might be the biggest conversation I'm having right now, which is hard for me because I like to talk about Genius Hour and passion projects. And depth is definitely one of the biggest conversations, and it's important right now. So I'm leaning into that work and really trying to consider, how do we give teachers the tools, the resources, the strategies, and the reality check that they need to really lean into this idea of depth without overwhelm. So while I set up the recording, I would ask, just FYI, we are recording, but I wanted to know kind of what do you guys think makes depth so overwhelming for teachers? Tell me in the chat, or you can unmute. What do you think makes depth so overwhelming for teachers? Oh, I am recording already, so it's perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yay.
I don't have an answer to your question just yet, but
I can hear your voice. That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. Okay, so what is it that makes depth so overwhelming? Maybe if I open the chat, that would help.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Diane said they think it's too much work. It's a good point, for themselves and for their learners. It's good.
Yes. I mean, it can seem like more work. I just try to think of it and share with people that I'm helping that it's more of an investment than it is.
Ooh.
If you look at it from that point of view.
Yeah.
You'll get your return off of your investment. Yes, it does take a little more thought process and planning, but it doesn't have to be as overwhelming as they perceive.
I love that. I think that's such a good point. I think sometimes the perception of depth is that it is more difficult than it actually is. And honestly, the conclusion I've come to in doing this work is that is not the fault of the teachers. That is the fault of systematically what they've been made to believe differentiation looks like. Mm-hmm. It's just not what it has to look like. And so I get that. Diane said she doesn't agree, but that oftentimes it's that idea of time issues. And I love that. I love that, Rebecca, what you shared about getting that return on your investment. I can tell you guys before we jump in, it's one of the reasons that I almost left education is because I didn't feel like I was getting a return on my investment, right? I was doing a lot of things and I thought I was doing a lot of things right, but there was no return on that investment. And frankly, it was exhausting. And I think there's a lot of teachers in that place right now. And I think that we have to get really honest about what depth is and the reality that to serve our gifted learners well, specifically, they don't need different, they need deeper. And so some of the strategies that I'm going to share with you guys tonight are things that you may have heard before. They may be things that you haven't heard before. I am talking from a little bit of a different perspective. So let's just jump right in. We may finish a little early, but my time zones are jacked up right now, and it's a lot later here than it is where I typically am. So a lot later, it's an hour later, but in my head, it's a lot later. Okay. So one of the things that I think is important is that we understand that we have to design for depth. It's not just going to happen. It's not something that our gifted learners are going to do for themselves. It is something that we as educators have to design for. And honestly, I think giving teachers some of that power back of this is the work, right? Designing meaningful learning experiences for our students. That's the good stuff. And I feel like with where we are right now in education, we've shifted some of that conversation to make teachers believe that they're not necessarily the designers, but the only person who can design for a classroom, I think, is the person who is in it every day, who is with those learners. Of course, you can have a blueprint. That's what your curriculum is. Of course, you can have a plan and what you're supposed to do. But the reality is, I'm just going to say it out loud, and I don't know if I should since we're recording, but it's true, right? The curriculum writers, they're not in your classroom. They weren't thinking of your kids when they were writing that curriculum. They weren't thinking of you when they were writing that curriculum. They were thinking about the standards. They were thinking about the boxes that need to be checked and what is going to sell their curriculum. And so that is not necessarily a bad thing, but they have created a blueprint. And so we have to take that and ask ourselves, where is the depth within this? And if it's not there, I'm just going to say it has to be added. I'm not suggesting that you have to do something other than your curriculum, but I am suggesting that if the depth isn't there for your learners, there's going to come a time and place where they're going to disengage. They're going to become apathetic. They're going to become maybe even a behavior problem because they're acting out. Maybe they may not even realize it, but because they're not getting that level of depth that they need in order to engage. Yes? Okay, hard to hear, hard to say. I don't know if I should have gone that far this early in the webinar, but we did. So here we go. Okay. Look, I'm never going to talk about depth without mentioning the depth and complexity icons. You guys tell me in the chat, how many of you are using the icons or your campus is using them? Are y'all familiar with these? In Texas, they're very popular. They're kind of part of our state plan. We talk about depth and complexity, but the depth and complexity icons are just a way to achieve depth. So they're not depth and complexity. They are a way to achieve that. And frankly, I think they're very useful. I use them in my own classroom. Sarah says teaching them, but not sure how many teachers use. I'll say this, a lot of teachers who use these oftentimes don't get the return on that investment, to use Rebecca's words. They don't get their return on their investment just because they're not using them to its depth. Sometimes we're using them to check a box, like, okay, it's a district-wide initiative that we're using the icons. So every time we do a vocabulary lesson, we're putting up language of the discipline. Or every time it's just, we want to make sure we're using these well. And Sandra Kaplan and Betty Gould created the icons. I had a really good conversation with John Gould one time, and he talked to me about how they created the icons to really trigger the way that a kid thinks. So when they see this icon, we want to trigger a specific way of thinking. And specifically, we want that to be an opportunity for them to think like an expert. Last week, I got to travel with my friend Lisa Van Gammert. And Lisa, if you don't know, I should know the name of the book, the Depth and Complexity Guidebook, maybe. Her and Ian Bird wrote a very cool book on depth and complexity. And Lisa's just such an expert on using the icons for exactly how they were created to be used. So that's one resource, if you haven't checked it out, that I would definitely recommend. But also, John Gould's website, depthcomplexity.com, is a great place to start as well. Okay. I'm never going to talk about depth and not mention those. You guys have heard me talk about this on several webinars. We're not going to talk specifically about this. I am going to share an idea, though, that uses this. So I wanted to make sure, if you haven't heard me talk about it before, that I introduce it if you haven't seen it. So I have been talking about this everywhere that I can. The depth and complexity icons are nouns. I think it's important that we have verbs to accompany those. And so the 4 verbs that I have been introducing to teachers to add depth to a learning experience is giving our learners the opportunity to explore, expand, examine, or evolve. And they're exactly what they sound like. Explore is like Genius Hour, question formulation technique, unanswered questions. That's explore. Expand is connection across disciplines, maybe a little acceleration, right? It's the opportunity to take what they know and expand it. So they're looking at what they've learned and they're looking at it really closely. I'm going to show you some real practical examples of these in just a second. And evolve is taking something I already know and evolving it, right? Taking it to the next step, taking it a little bit further. So these are the 4 verbs that I feel like teachers have just said to me, like, these verbs have helped me so much in learning how to design extensions. Teachers that work a lot with artificial intelligence have said this has given me a framework to use with artificial intelligence to design for depth. So again, I've done many webinars on this. You're welcome to go back and watch those within the community, but I am going to show you some specifics around them. So I wanted to make sure I at least introduce them. Just adding the verb isn't going to add depth. I've had some teachers email me and they're like, I'm doing this, but it's just not really add. I'm like, it can't just be the verb. There are some specific keys throughout our webinar that I feel like are necessary to implement depth without overwhelm. Specifically, I think we're doing 5 keys. I kind of thought 4, but I think we're doing 5. 5 keys to kind of do depth without overwhelm. And so if you're taking notes, anytime you see this slide, this is a key idea. See what I did there? This is a key idea that you want to either take a picture of or write down. One of the biggest conversations that I think have to happen right now is that depth does not always equal acceleration. It also does not equal extra assignments. It's about going further into the meaning of what they're learning, not faster through the content. Gosh, I think fundamentally we know this, but when it comes to serving our gifted learners and showing that we're serving them, I think we just still fall back on that idea of making things, just giving them more or making them busy. And that makes zero work. I'm reading the chat. Stephanie said, I'm doing a district PD on them, but still need to make the jump to start. Yes. So good. That's exciting. Well, if you need any help, let me know, and I'll be happy to share some ideas with you or some resources. Okay. Would you guys agree that this is still fundamentally what we assume gifted learners need is exploration or extra assignments?
Yes.
Okay. What's some of the evidence of that? What's some of the, I see this happening in the classroom?
Well, I see some of the projects that the kids are doing that have finished the regularly assigned work. Mm-hmm. The depth did not change any. It's just so the project is very lateral. And so I'm trying to explain, to the classroom teaching audience that's not growing them as a learner.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I like that you said it was a project, because I think we tend to put gifted learners and projects together. And there are a lot of projects that are not done for the learner. So I love that. Autumn, I'm so glad you're here, Autumn. Autumn said when they finish work early, assigning them more of the same work. That makes zero sense, especially, I always say, what qualifies a kid for an extension is, one, if they finish their work early and it's not trash, right? If they finish their work early and it's done well, they don't have to demonstrate to somebody 15 times that they understand something. That makes zero sense. In fact, a strategy that we've talked about often in the work that I did at the ESC, it sounds like a bad word, MDF. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's most difficult first, right? If you can do the most difficult of what we're going to do first, then I don't need to give you the same and make you prove it over and over again. Instead, I need to give you something more meaningful. But the question then becomes, what does that look like? What do we give them? Well, I think a couple of things we have to consider. One of the most important that I will not shut up about this, because I think in gifted services, what we tend to do, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, what we tend to do is feel like we have to give our kids more content. So, okay, what are they going to be learning about? What's something new I can teach them this week? Okay, we did that last week. What can I do this week? We think they need something new all the time because we think they understand things quickly and they like to have a lot of knowledge. Both things are correct. The problem is, if we are just giving them content, we are staying right here on the surface. There is no opportunity to get to the level of depth that is necessary in order to serve them in a way that makes sense for who they are as learners. And so one of the things that I've been saying often, you've probably heard me say it, is that it's got to be less content, more depth, most skills. That's it. We've got to give them less content. We've got to give them more opportunity to go deeper into the content that they do get. But most importantly, we have to focus on growing the skills that so many of them are lacking. We're seeing it play out all the time right now. These gifted kids who are graduating with a ton of knowledge, they know a lot of things, but they don't have the skills, they don't have the ability to transfer that knowledge into a way that makes sense beyond the walls of the classroom. What do you guys think about that? This idea of less content, more depth, most skills. I'm going to pause for a second. Tell me in the chat, or you can unmute and tell me. Sarah likes it. That makes me happy. Sarah, I'm glad you're here. It's good to see you. Or it's good to see you in the chat. You know, I get asked a lot about gifted services and what should they look like? Or if you were going to design the perfect gifted services, what would they look like? I was like, well, first of all, I would never be able to design perfect gifted services, but I'll tell you, if I was going to narrow it down to what it should look like, this would be it. I would have a sticky wherever I was designing that curriculum, and it would say less content, more depth, more depth, most skills. It's why I'm such a fan of Genius Hour being the way that we serve gifted learners. There is content involved in a Genius Hour project. They are learning new things, but ultimately they are having to learn those things at a deeper level because of DOK level 4, right? It's the opportunity to transfer their knowledge, transfer the things that they know into a different situation or use it in a different way. But most importantly, they are practicing those skills of executive functioning. They're practicing intrinsic motivation, creativity, and innovation. And those are the things that are going to move the needle. Those are the things that are going to give them what they need beyond the walls of the classroom. Diane says, I think that's, let's see, Sarah says it makes sense as a way to monitor or assign those critical thinking pieces rather than content. Yes. And Diane says, I think that's why teachers are hesitant to design for depth because and they're wrong, right? It doesn't have to be more content. In fact, I think the more content you have, the harder it is to go deep into that content. Instead, if I could take a piece of content and I could think about the standards that I'm teaching, it goes back to the way we used to always do things, right? The unit where we would take an idea and we would go deeper into it. I just think that probably makes sense. So less content, more depth, most skills. So that is key number 1. Key idea number 2, gifted learners crave challenge, but they can also be prone to perfectionism, anxiety, or burnout, right? So this idea that they want to be challenged, they crave that depth, but sometimes the things that who they are as gifted learners, that perfectionism, that anxiety, that like burnout feeling, those things can sometimes contradict, right? Yes, I want to be challenged, but I also am a perfectionist. Yes, I want to be challenged, but it also makes me really anxious when I'm challenged, or I completely burn out when I'm challenged. So that can make serving them a little bit difficult because it's like, gosh, how do we do? What do we do around those things? Well, we just keep putting them in it. I've said this maybe in every webinar that I've done, but it's like going to the gym, right? The people who go to the gym and can lift weights well can do that because they have done the reps. They have done it over and over and over again. And the only way our gifted learners are going to get better at challenge, the only way they get better at productive struggle is to just do the reps. And that means putting them in that situation over and over and over again. So I wanted to share 3 strategies that I think you could do to kind of make this happen. One is a pre-mortem strategy. I don't know if you guys have heard of a pre-mortem. I talk about it every once in a while, and sometimes I forget to talk about it, so I wanted to share it on this webinar. A pre-mortem strategy is a strategy that they use in the business world, and in that strategy, they kind of come into the boardroom and they talk about a project that they're doing or something that they're putting into practice. Like, we're about to launch this big initiative. And before they do a pre-mortem. In other words, we're going to pretend before we even launch this thing that it's completely died, right? It was killed. It didn't end well. It did not make it. And we're going to sit around this boardroom and we're going to talk about, why did it not make it? Why did it fail? Why was it a complete disaster? Why did it die? What were some of the potential causes for that? What were the reasons for failure? And that way, before they ever launch or before they ever get this idea out of that boardroom, they have a plan for addressing some of those obstacles. In other words, I already know how to see some of these obstacles as opportunities. I have used this with gifted learners, and it works so well just for them to be able to know, I may not be able to prepare for every obstacles that are going to come up. I can respond to that in a much more, I guess, like manageable way, right? I don't feel like I have to completely lose it because I've at least prepared for some of these obstacles that are popping up. So pre-mortem strategy, look it up. It's a really good business strategy that you could transfer into your classroom. My favorite, no, you guys have probably heard of this. There's a great YouTube video that you could go watch if you haven't. This is just about celebrating wrong answers, right? I'm not always going to celebrate the correct answer. Yes, you can celebrate the correct answer, but what if you celebrate a kid who got the wrong answer, but took a risk in the way they solved for that answer? Or what if you celebrate a kid who didn't get the right answer, but they collaborated really well with someone else as they were working? So I think I love that idea of my favorite no. I think it reminds our kids that, yes, the right answer is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you take a risk and get reason to celebrate that as well. Yes? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. I got an email this week. It was so sweet. It was from a guy who was at one of the conferences that I did recently. And at the end of it, he put yes in big letters with question mark. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's speaking my language. All right. So the third is celebrating struggle. And this is just maybe on a Friday, you just as a class come together and say like, hey, let's celebrate what we didn't do well. And your kids are going to be like, what? Why would we do that? Because it's not about just, and here's how this works. Stephanie Higgs, Little Miss Gifted, we both talk about this. She calls it a celebration. I call it a fellathon. Either one works. But just, hey, we're going to have an opportunity for you to share something that you struggled with this week. But your next question has to be, what did you learn from that? So maybe they just come in on a Friday and you just have them write it on an index card. On the front of the index card, I want you to write a struggle that you had this week. On the back of that index card, I want you to write what you learned from it. And you're just reminding them, hey, struggle is valuable. You get something from that struggle. You get something in return. And I think that can be good. So I would ask you guys, out of those three ideas, pre-mortem strategy, my favorite no, and celebrating struggle, what is something you feel like you could implement right away? Because remember, this affects this key idea of the challenge, but also being prone to that perfectionism, anxiety, or burnout, right?
Excuse my dog's barking. My kids that I recently started teaching, they have not been in a position where they had that struggle. And so as I have put them in that situation, they've been quite uncomfortable. And we talked about the term like being on the struggle bus and how that's my one of my goals is for them to ride on the struggle bus, because then they're being challenged. And we were doing some logic work one day and this kid was just so stuck and he's like, oh my God, I'm tired of riding on this struggle bus. I got to get off at the next stop. You know, he was just, and it was like once he said that and acknowledged that he was struggling, and I just told him, I said, right now you're looking through a tunnel. You've got to open your perspective up some. He went and he sat down and thought about it for a little bit. And then he literally out loud was just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And so, then from there on, he just flew through, the rest of that challenge. And I've tried to get them to be comfortable in that struggle. And, like you said, celebrating it, acknowledging it, and coming out the other side is a struggle in itself.
It is. It is. But man, when they come out on the other side, it's so good. Sarah said, oh, I love that idea. She said it would be interesting to do a pre-mortem with teachers about implementing something new like depth and complexity. Like, what could go wrong, right? Let's talk about that. So Rebecca, I love what you shared about that little guy. It's so true. And then I also love that idea of using something like this with teachers, because it's the same, right? There's this internal, what if this doesn't go the way that I thought it would? Or what if I put the time and energy into doing this and I don't get the return on my investment? Then I'm going to be frustrated. Then it's be hard. Well, what if we just say those things out loud, right? And let's go ahead and say, what if you don't get the return on your investment? What could you have done to ensure that that doesn't happen? Or what does the return on your investment look like? And if that the expectation of that is too big, what are some of the smaller returns that we could look for? Maybe it's just that intentionality of looking for them. So I love that, Sarah. Such a good idea. Autumn says, I like the pre-mortem strategy, but we'll probably start with celebrating struggle. I think that's great. I think that's awesome. Okay, thank you guys for being with me. I know some of you have seen that before, but I think there are three good ideas to kind of think about. All right, key idea number 3. Gosh, I'm blowing through this. I need to slow down a little bit. Let learners pursue depth that matters to them. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we think we have to tell our learners what direction of depth they need to go in. Hey, here's what you need to do next, instead of giving them some options. But I also think the opposite is true. I think sometimes we give them too much choice. In fact, on Instagram, in my email, on my podcast this week, all of it is going to center around this idea of creativity constraints, right? And how constraints can make us more creative, right? We all know that. The first person, well, I've heard a lot of people say that, but I've heard Brian Housen talk about that a lot. How giving our learners constraints can actually allow them to be more creative. And I think sometimes when it comes to choice boards, or we hear people talk about choice, we get a little carried away. In my earlier webinar, we were talking about just tic-tac-toe boards, right? Ian Bird says 2 choices is a choice. You don't have to give a kid 9 choices. That can be really overwhelming for a gifted learner. And I think for so many of our gifted kids, that is a problem. They feel like they have too much choice. I'll tell you right now, one of the things I'm focusing on sharing this week are the creative constraints that you can add to Genius Hour to actually make it a little bit deeper. And I think sometimes we think the opposite, that I think we think if we give them complete autonomy, they'll go deeper. And I think the opposite is true. I think sometimes they need more structure. They need some of those constraints so that they can start warming up those creativity muscles. What do you guys think about that idea of letting them pursue depth that matters to them, giving them choice, but having constraints around those choices and not feeling like we have to give them 9 choices? Just so you guys, just so I can share some examples, I was talking about Genius Hour today on Instagram. I'm trying to find the post. You know, I can't even find my own post when I'm trying to. Give me a second. Okay, let me just go to my own page. Oh, it's because we haven't posted it yet. That would be why. It's going to be posted. Carrie's probably on here right now, like Andy. We haven't shared that yet. Some very specific examples that we were going to give for Genius Hour are: 1, choose a project that would positively impact the school or community. So maybe not give them all of the purpose buckets, but give them just kindness bucket. No internet access for research. Can't use the internet, right? How are you going to get your information? What is that going to look like? Your pitch can only be 1 minute. What are the most important things you need to tell us about your project? So you can see you're still giving them freedom. You're still letting them pursue things that matter to them, but you're doing it with those constraints. And I think oftentimes those constraints can really spark a breakthrough. So something that we want to think about. Okay, so I wanted to give you some examples. I love the idea of creating a choice board. I think a feasible number of choices is 4. I like the idea of 2 choices. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the direction of depth verbs, there are 4 of them. And I wanted to show you guys some examples of what that could look like. So the water cycle, we all know is my favorite thing to talk about, right? Anytime I give an example, it's connected to the water cycle. But here is how you could create a choice board with these 4 verbs. So here is the choice for explore. I'm going to give you a second to look at this, and then we'll come back together. Typically, the explore piece is going to involve a question, right? What would happen if one part of the water cycle stopped working? And letting them think through that. And they can do that with models, diagrams. You could give them choice in the product that they create or how they share their thinking. But this is curiosity driven, and they're having to think creatively. Yes, does that make sense? So that's explore. This would be, if you were teaching the water cycle, this would be the choice for examine. Ooh, explaining it in slow motion. So this isn't just like, give me a broad picture like, oh yeah, we got precipitation, condensation. As much as I talk about the water cycle, you would think I would know a lot about it, but I know very little about the water cycle. But that being said, right, oh, look, the words are right in front of me. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation. And so having them really think through that, it's like putting the water cycle under the microscope and zooming in on one part of that, really zooming in on precipitation. So they may choose examine, or they may choose expand. Here's how they could connect that across disciplines. Gosh, there's so much happening in this. There's synthesis, those connections. that opportunity to make those connected to something outside of what you're actually talking about and across disciplines, which I just think is huge and something we should do more of. And then finally, this would be evolve if they were going to choose evolve on the choice board. Look, this was so easy to do because I went into artificial intelligence. I asked it to use the direction of depth model. I told it what I would be teaching, and then I was specific about what I wanted it to do. This is going to be a choice board. I want it to be an opportunity for my learners to demonstrate evidence of depth. Can you share with me 4 tasks connected to these verbs that would connect to this specific piece of content? What do you guys think about using the 4 verbs as a choice board, but you don't have to give 3 choices under expand, 3 choices under evolve. They are literally choosing one of the verbs: examine, expand, evolve, or explore. Diane loves it. That makes me happy.
I really like it. I think it's a great idea to use those 4 verbs, and, it allows them to go deeper. Mm-hmm. And I do like the fact, that like using the AI in order to make it match.
Yes, that's such a great way to put it, to make it match. And you're still saying to AI, because here's what I do. I put the graphic into AI, the graphic of direction of depth. And if you want that, I can send it to you. And I just say, use this model to create these. And so under each one of those models, just so you guys can see, let me show you. This is the picture that I put in. And so it gets an explanation of what each one of those is. So that's how it knows this is what I'm designing. And when you connect that to your content, that's another thing that I think. I think too often when teachers think about designing for depth, they think, oh, I have to give them a project or I have to give them something different. No, you're still doing the water cycle just like the rest of the class. We're just going to give them an opportunity to go deeper when they're ready. So yes, I love that idea of making them match. That was a really great way to put it. Any other thoughts? How about this? I will put the graphic in the Meaningful Mess community tonight. So it will be there. And Carrie's also going to share out some resources. So we'll make sure that in the notes and in the community, we put the image of direct. Does that sound okay, Autumn?
Yes.
Yeah, Diane. Oh, good. Okay. Diane, I think they would think it's doable too. I can tell you they think it's doable because I talk to them almost every day. And so many of them said, if I just had these verbs, I would have been doing this all along. It just seems like extra work. And then I feel like I have to come up with something new. And then I've got a plan for it. And I'm like, that is the problem, because that's the message we've sent to teachers. That differentiation means they have to do something different. That is not true. Gifted learners don't have to do something different. They need to do something deeper. And so giving them the opportunity to do that with these verbs, I think can be really powerful. Okay.
Andy, I also think that those 4 verbs gives them, kind of their multiple intelligence level of what they want to do. And I think it meets that. And I think that's a really great connection there too.
Awesome. I love that. It kind of meets the needs of how different kids think differently and need to look at the learning differently. And that's exactly what it is. It's just seeing the learning through different lenses. And that can be really powerful. So again, you're offering them choice, but you're doing it within the constraints of those 4 verbs. You're not just like, writing a song or writing a poem about this, but we're doing it within the constraints of those 4 verbs. Yes. Oh gosh, Diane, me too. Diane says, I wish there was another word for differentiation. It's a bad connotation over the years. Yeah, because it has the word different in it. Don't hear me arguing with Carol Ann Tomlinson, because I'm not trying to do that. I'm a big fan of her work. I think differentiation is important. But I think along the way, we have somehow decided that differentiation means different. And I think we somehow decided that it means completely different. Like those kids are doing something completely different than everyone else. And I don't think that's always necessary. Okay. We're almost there, you guys. Structured frameworks help learners go deep without getting lost. So this is kind of tied to that same idea of constraints, but I'm saying gifted learners don't always just need complete autonomy. Like they don't, a lot of people, when they talk about student driven learning, we talk about learners being in the driver's seat, but it's important to remember they got to have a map, right? They got to know where they're going. And so I think some of the ideas that we could connect to this kind of topic, Socratic seminars, they are structured, right? There is a way that you do that, but there's also an openness to those. Genius Hour. I tried Genius Hour without a structure. It did not work. It did not end well, right? It was a terrible idea. But as soon as I created and started using the 6 P's of Genius Hour, everything changed because I was giving my students autonomy, but I was doing so with a roadmap. I wasn't just saying, hey, go pursue your passions. That's what I tried to do. And they were like, what are we doing again? It was just a mess. But when they were able to use their to and follow a roadmap, and by the way, within that roadmap, I knew what skills I was trying to build in my learners. Hey, when they're on passion, this is self-awareness. When they're planning, that's executive functioning. When they're pitching, that's giving and receiving feedback. When they're working on their project, that's reflection. When they're working on their product, that's creativity and innovation. And when they're presenting, that's an opportunity for them to take all of those things and put it together. Every single part of that process had a purpose. It's not just a cute little framework. There is a purpose. And the same is true for Socratic Seminar. Gosh, the Socratic sister, if you don't follow her on Instagram, she was on my podcast a while back, and she just shared such great ideas. You could go listen. I can't remember what episode it was, but it's the only episode about Socratic Seminars. And she just talked about how it was important for her to have a structure for that, but the return on that investment, the opportunity for her learners to learn how to collaborate and communicate with each other was huge. So this idea that structured frameworks are, not what's best for gifted learners, or it's too much. No, like they can actually help them go deep without getting lost. And then the other strategy that I wanted to share with you guys, or set of strategies, is Project Zero's thinking routines. If you haven't seen these, we were actually talking about them on the last webinar, and I was like, oh, that's going to be in the next webinar. Project Zero's thinking routines are amazing, and that's exactly what they are, thinking routines. So they are structured ways for our students to think with just enough autonomy that it encourages depth. Right. If you haven't seen these before, I'm just going to show you real quick. I think I can do this. Let me see if I can. I'm taking a real risk here because I have no idea if this is going to let me share this or not. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing real quick. I want you guys to see these. This is what they look like if you haven't seen them before. And you can just scroll down. You can look at kind of what you're hoping to do, digging deeper into ideas. That seems like a good plan. So you click here, and here are all of the kind of structured thinking routines that you could use to make that happen. So let's just look at outside in. So when you click on this, I'm at that age where like sometimes I can see, sometimes I can't. Resource links. So it gives you everything that you need to make that happen. Here's what the launch looks like. Here's the graphic organizer, just such a great resource. And I think so many people don't know that these exist. So Project Zero, thinking routines. And when you go to this thinking routine toolbox, you'll get these types of thinking categories. And that's where you want to be. What do you guys think about that? Is anybody using these? And if so, how's it going? What do you think about them?
I don't think I've even heard of it. So I'm very excited.
That's exciting. Awesome. Hey, Teresa, it's always so fun to see the people who are here as you guys pop into the comments. It's good to see you, Teresa, for sure. There's the wave. Teresa, have you used these before, the thinking routines? Oh, Trisha hasn't heard of them before, but you'll be checking them out soon. I think you should. There's so much to dig. It is literally a toolbox. There is so much to dig through. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I shared these. I almost didn't because I was like, they may have all heard of these. So I'm so glad. Okay, Teresa, there you go. I'm so glad I shared them for sure. Okay, perfect. Let me move right along. All right, Socratic Seminars, Genius Hour, and those thinking routines, very cool. You guys, I'm telling you, when you get some spare time, go to that website and dig through some of those. You will probably use some of those ideas tomorrow. All right, I think we were thinking through this before the webinar. Carrie and I were talking, and we were trying to just like, what is this whole thing with these structured routines? And immediately one of the analogies that came to mind was a kite, right? A kite kind of gets to go wherever it wants to go. But if it's not anchored, right, if there's not something guiding it, what happens to it? It's not a trick question. You guys tell me what you think. Yeah, it's in the ground or bye-bye, right? It's going to disappear. It's going to completely go where it probably, and ultimately that is going to be a problem for the kite. And I think the same is true for our gifted learners. Now, you can decide how much freedom you give a kite. You can give it more or less slack. And I think for some of our gifted learners, they can deal with a lot of that slack. I think for some of our gifted learners, it may need to be a little bit tighter, right? But I think it's really important that we consider and we think about anchoring our learners and not anchoring them so tightly that they don't have the autonomy to move around or they don't have that freedom, but anchoring them enough that they're able to get to that level of depth without it just being a complete mess, right? It's the reason I call my work a meaningful mess and not just a mess. Okay. Last key idea that I want to share around depth not resulting in overwhelm is depth is deepened by dialogue and not done alone. And I think sometimes our gifted learners do feel alone. They do feel like, gosh, I'm the only one that thinks this way, or why am I so different? And that can be difficult, right? So depth is deepened by dialogue and not done alone. It's the reason that we have to be real understanding of the fact that putting kids in groups does not equal collaboration. Those are not the same thing. So I can put a kid in a group, tell them to do group work, and I can tell you from experience, there can be absolutely zero collaboration going on in that situation. Yes, have you guys seen that happen before? Oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. I was like, can you not see this? No, you can't. Okay, here, let me fix this. Y'all didn't get to see the kite. Did y'all see the kite? No, here's the kite analogy that is so beautiful that I put in here. You're just going to look at it for a second, then I'm going to move on. Okay, here's the fifth key idea. Depth is deepened by dialogue and not done alone. And I was saying group work and collaboration, not the same thing. Would you guys agree with that? Like, have you seen situations like that where you're like, oh, definitely group work is happening right now, but not a lot of collaboration? Autumn says definitely.
This is Teresa, by the way.
Hey, my Ohio friend.
I know I can't. Are you in Ohio right now?
I am. We're in the same state right now.
Oh my gosh, this is so terrible. You're only, 2 hours away?
Good to have dinner. Okay, go ahead.
I always make it a point to talk to my class before I put them in groups and tell them that, like, I give them examples of how they should be working together, and I give them non-examples, things like, this doesn't mean that you assign each person a problem and then they share all the answers. That's not working together. I mean, it kind of is, but
Right.
they probably know that too. But I just try to give examples of what it should look like, when they're in the group. So
I love that, Teresa. And I love that you said you give examples and non-examples, because sometimes I think the non-example can be more helpful than the example, because they get examples all day long. Like, okay, thanks for telling us what this looks like. But I think when you say, here's what this doesn't look like, that's when they sometimes clue in. I can tell you when I talk to family groups about giftedness, when I put the slide up around what giftedness is, everybody's like, okay. When I put the slide up that says this is what giftedness isn't, you can audibly hear parents be like, oh, like it's different. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So what a great strategy to share with your kids what group work is, but also what it isn't. So very cool.
And sometimes when we're done, I have them explain how their group shared the work, just to give other kids ideas too. I mean, it's usually just a brief thing, but it's usually helpful.
Yeah, letting them like teach each other what this looks like, because they listen to themselves sometimes better than they listen to us. So not a bad strategy. Some of you probably saw this coming, but I'm never going to talk about collaboration without talking about thought partnership. So I oftentimes share causeit.org. If you have not been on their website, since we're hanging out, let me just show you guys real quick what this looks like. I just never know when to stop, but this is good. You guys need to see this. Cause it thought partnership. Okay. Brian and I do a session on thought partnership, and every once in a while I get a chance to share this resource. I don't get to share it very often because I never have time, but let me show you real quick. Okay, causeit.org has this resource. If you just Google Causeit Thought Partner, you'll find this. We'll put it in the resources. But I love these different types of thought partners. So look, some of those almost sound like depth and complexity icons. Details, big picture, big idea. But it kind of like ideas and details, process and details. You can see how these things come together, and these are different types of thought partners. So maybe you're an explorer, maybe you're a planner, maybe you're an energizer. I know that Carrie and my thought partner, we are complete opposites. She thought partners very differently than I do. I like to share a lot of ideas, and she does too, but she's also a really good listener. I am not a great listener. And so we just connect differently, and we approach thought partnership differently, but that's what makes it so valuable, right? That's how I'm able to learn from Carrie, is that she's exactly like I do. So really powerful. So if you're looking for some ways to take thought partnership to the next level, this could be a really great thing to kind of add to your list of resources. What do you guys think about that? Those lists of the different types of thought partners? Yes, no, maybe so. We're almost done, I promise. Okay, Autumn gives a thumbs up. That's enough to help me sleep tonight. Okay, so here is what I think the difference is between thought partnership and peer tutoring, or thought partnership and group work. Thought partnership encourages active participation without the burden of teaching. So when you have a kid in a group, not to teach the group, but to actively participate, that is thought partnership. But when it imposes the role of teaching, or they are explaining concepts to their peers, now it becomes burdensome, right? Not a good situation. Thought partnership promotes engagement and enthusiasm for learning. They want to be there. They want to be a part of it. Peer tutoring can lead to burnout and frustration, which connects to one of our other key ideas that we talked about. Thought partnership fosters positive peer relationships. There's not that situation where they're like, we got the gifted kid again. This is going to be terrible, right? And that is sometimes the response. It's one of the 8 great gripes of gifted learners. Our peers, sometimes give us a hard time or make fun of us. And that's oftentimes happened because of the role that we put them in, not because of who they are as a gifted learner, and not because their friends are jerks. It happens because they are put in situations that they, those can lead to isolation or feelings of burden. And then thought partnership encourages critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration, where peer tutoring or group work puts undue pressure on gifted learners to always have the correct answer where they need to go. So I want to give you one more really practical strategy that you can use in your classroom to really kind of make this idea, depth is deepened by dialogue, not done alone. Because a lot of our gifted kids don't know how to have that dialogue. So here's a strategy. Let me just fast forward through this. Here's a strategy that you could implement tomorrow that encourages that dialogue. So it's called Obviously, But What If? I'm just going to share the one that I did in South Carolina just because it's the slides that I had. And so this was the example that I shared. Obviously, this is a palmetto tree. I did not know a lot about a palmetto tree until I realized it was on there. But what if? So you'd put them in partners. You would show any picture, right? Appropriate, but any random picture. And you would say, obviously, this is sand dunes. Obviously, this is a picture of the sun. Obviously, this is a race car. The partner has to respond to that, not with, oh, yeah, I agree. They have to give an alternative. So the first partner says, obviously this is, and they say, obviously what it is. The partner has to then say, but what if? So I'm going to give you guys a second to read these what ifs. I love these so much. What if it's really a secret elevator that carries people down to an underwater city? What if it's the antenna of an enormous radio sending South Carolina stories to space? What if every leaf is a page in a book and the wind flips them to tell new stories each day? Like, just, you can't say it's a palmetto tree. So you have to come up with something creative. And I love this. You could use this strategy to begin class, right? To start to warm up their engines for creative thinking. You could use this to encourage dialogue because both partners have to have an opinion. This partner's going to say, obviously, this person's going to say, but what if? And then they can switch out. Okay, what do you guys think about obviously, but what if? Rebecca loves it. That's good. Super easy. I mean, you could do that tomorrow and gives you a big return on your investment. So yeah, definitely something to do if you have a little extra time, if you're trying to teach your kids how to engage in that dialogue. But a lot of our gifted kids don't know how to listen to somebody else's opinion. And in a situation like this, they don't have a choice. You're either the obviously or you're the what if, but you have to listen to your partner's response. I always think it's a good idea to, after a kid after they've done group work, after they've worked with a thought partner, to say what today made them better at. Did today's experience in group work make you a better thinker? Did it make you a better listener? Did it make you a better collaborator? Did it make you a better friend, a better explainer? Like, you can't just do group work and then not let them reflect on it. They have to have the opportunity to reflect on, how did that experience make me better? How did I grow? How did I, maybe it's about, did it make you a deeper thinker? Did it make you, whatever that is. But I love the idea of using the reflection prompt. Today's group work or today's collaboration, today's thought partnership made me a better what? Okay, gosh, that was fast and furious. I would love to continue to learn with you guys. So you can, if you want to fill out the form to let me know what you thought about tonight, I would love that. It just helps me make these better for you guys. But my hope in these short little webinars,